My grandmother raised me after my parents divorced, and my father took his new life somewhere west, somewhere without me in it. My mother was never stable enough for custody. Not violent, just gone in the way certain people are gone, even when they're standing right in front of you. So it was Nana, her house, her rules, her casseroles every Sunday that I still can't smell without crying. She passed when I was 22, left me the house in a neighborhood that had gone quieter over the years. The kind of quiet where you notice every creak in the floor because there's nothing else to cover it. I was finishing my last year of graduate school remotely, so I moved in rather than pay rent somewhere else. It made financial sense. I told myself that for a long time. I should tell you about my recording habit first. I've had insomnia since I was a teenager. At some point, I started leaving a voice recorder running on my nightstand, an old digital one, not an app, because I read somewhere that the compression in phone recordings distorts audio. My logic was that I could catch myself if I talked in my sleep, which my college roommate had told me I occasionally did. I never caught anything interesting. White noise, my own breathing, sometimes the house settling. I'd grown so used to checking the recordings in the morning that it became ritual. Brush teeth, start coffee, plug in the recorder, skim through. The first recording I flagged was in my third week at the house. I almost missed it because it happened at 3:14 a.m., buried in 5 hours of silence. I was skimming at high speed and almost slid past it, but something made me slow down. A voice. My voice, unmistakably. Same cadence, same slight nasality I've always hated, but saying something I have no memory of saying. She's still here, you know. That was all. Clear as anything. My voice from my recorder on my nightstand while I was asleep. I sat with my coffee going cold and played it 6 more times. It was me. I've heard myself in recordings enough to know. I told myself it was sleep talking. I had a history of it. There was no reason to think otherwise. I deleted it and didn't think about it for 4 days. The second flagged recording was worse. Same dead hour, 3-something a.m., same voice. But this time, there were 2 sounds. First, a door. The particular 3-beat creak of my grandmother's bedroom door at the end of the hall, which I kept shut because I wasn't ready to do anything with her things yet. I know that creak. I heard it 10,000 times growing up whenever she'd check on me in the night. Then my voice again. Still asleep, still in bed. I confirmed this because I could hear my own breathing slow and unchanged underneath it, saying, "Not yet. She's not done." I want to be very precise here. The breathing did not change. Whatever part of me said those words, it was not the part that was awake. I called my friend Dara that morning and played her the clip over the phone. She said it was definitely my voice. She also said I should sleep somewhere else. I laughed. I stayed. By the 5th recording, I had stopped deleting them. I had started transcribing them instead, because the things being said were too specific to dismiss. They referenced objects in the house I hadn't found yet. One recording mentioned the letters behind the radiator in the front room, and I found them. A bundle of correspondence between my grandmother and a sister I never knew she had, tied with kitchen twine, shoved behind the radiator as if hidden. Another recording said, the photograph under the blue dish. I found a photograph under a blue ceramic dish in the kitchen cabinet. My grandmother at maybe 30, standing with a man I didn't recognize, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. I was not sleep-talking randomly. Something was using my voice as a medium, or I was losing my mind. I held both possibilities with equal weight. I made an appointment with a sleep specialist and was told I showed no signs of parasomnia beyond what I'd already known about. I had a psychiatric screening. Nothing concerning emerged. I was, by every clinical measure, fine. The recordings kept coming. The turning point was the night I set up a camera. I positioned my laptop at the foot of the bed, recording video, running simultaneously with the voice recorder on the nightstand. I told no one. I went to sleep as normally as I could. At 3:09 a.m., my voice spoke again. Ask her about the sister. She'll tell you now. And when I reviewed the video in the morning, I watched myself. I was in bed, mouth closed. Still, completely asleep. Not a single muscle moved, not even the slight jaw movement of sleep-talking, which I'd read about and specifically looked for. My mouth did not move. Not once. The voice came out of the recorder, out of the air. out of somewhere the camera couldn't see. But it was my voice. It has always been my voice. I drove to the memory care facility where my grandmother's sister, my great-aunt Rosalind, whom I had never met, whom I hadn't even known existed until I found those letters, was living out her final years in a fog of late-stage dementia. I showed the nurses the photograph. They confirmed it was her. Decades younger, but her. I sat with Rosalind for 2 hours. Most of it was quiet. She held my hand and looked at something past my shoulder. But near the end of our visit, she focused. Really focused, like a window clearing. She looked directly at me and said, in a voice that sounded nothing like mine and exactly like someone speaking from a long way away, "Your grandmother wanted you to know she's not angry about your mother, about any of it. She stayed until you found the letters." Then the window closed again. She asked me if I'd come to fix the radiator. My grandmother had died 8 weeks before I moved into the house. The recordings stopped that night. I checked for 3 more months, obsessively every morning. Nothing. Just my breathing, and the old house settling, and, once, a moth that had gotten in somehow, tapping against the inside of the lampshade. I have the transcripts. I have the video of my mouth not moving. I have the letters from behind the radiator. I don't know what was in that house with me, but I know it knew my voice better than I did, and I know it was finished when I was. My older brother Callum moved back in with me in October, 3 weeks after his wife asked him to leave. I had the space, a 2-story rental, one of those narrow row houses where you can hear everything through the floors, every footstep, every chair scraping, every faucet. I gave him the downstairs. He'd come up for meals sometimes, or I'd hear the TV murmuring below me at odd hours when he couldn't sleep, which was often. Divorce does that to a person. I didn't ask questions. I just let him have the downstairs and tried to give him what privacy I could. He wasn't doing well. I knew that without him saying it. I could tell by the sounds, the way he moved around down there at 2 a.m., the way his footsteps would stop in the middle of the floor for long stretches, like he'd forgotten where he was going. Once I heard him crying through the vent in my bathroom floor, and I turned the faucet on so he'd think I hadn't. I don't know if that was the right thing to do. This went on for about 6 weeks. Then one Wednesday evening he told me he'd found an apartment, signed the lease, was moving out at the end of the month. He seemed lighter. He made dinner for us, pasta, nothing special, and we sat and talked for the first time in what felt like months. He looked like himself again. I went to bed feeling genuinely relieved. He moved out on a Saturday while I was helping a coworker with something across town. He texted me when he was done. All clear. Left the key on the counter. Thank you for everything. I texted back a string of things. That I was proud of him. That he should call more. That the door was always open. He sent back a single thumbs up, which was so Callum it made me smile. The house felt different that night. Quieter in a way that takes adjusting to. I ate dinner standing at the counter and watched something on my laptop and went to bed early. Through the floor, nothing. Just the particular silence of an empty room. It lasted 4 nights. On the 5th night, I heard footsteps downstairs. I was half asleep when they started. Slow, crossing the living room, the same path Callum used to walk when he couldn't sleep. My first thought, still foggy, was he's up late again. Then I remembered. I sat up in the dark and listened. The footsteps stopped. I checked my phone. 1:47 a.m. I sat still for several minutes. Nothing else. I told myself the house was just adjusting. Old buildings expand and contract. Wood settles. It mimics weight when there is none. I believed it enough to lie back down. The next night, they came again. Same time, same path. I called Callum the following morning and didn't mention it. Just checked in. He sounded fine. Better than fine. He'd gotten furniture delivered. He was sleeping well. He was thinking about joining a gym. He asked if I was okay. I said yes. We hung up, and I stood in my kitchen holding the phone and trying to decide if I was actually frightened or just not used to being alone. By the end of the 2nd week, I had a routine. I would lie in bed and wait. The footsteps would start around 1:30 or 2 a.m. They would cross the living room, stop near the base of the stairs, and then go quiet. Sometimes I would hear what sounded like the couch cushion compressing, a slow exhale of air, like someone sitting down. Then nothing until morning. I did not go downstairs. I want to be honest about that. Something in me didn't want to confirm what I'd find, which was, rationally, nothing. Callum came by to grab a box he'd forgotten on a Sunday afternoon. I walked him down to the lower floor and watched him move through the space, and it struck me how lived in it still looked. A water glass on the end table I hadn't put there. The couch slightly displaced from where I remembered Callum leaving it. I didn't say anything. After he left, I checked every window, all locked. The deadbolt on the front door was engaged, the back door too. I checked the closets. I stood in the middle of the downstairs living room and thought, there is nobody here. The room agreed with me. I went upstairs and made a decision. I would set up my old laptop on the kitchen counter downstairs, camera facing the living room, motion-triggered recording. Not because I was sure something was wrong, just because I needed the footage to tell me nothing was. I checked it the next morning after a night of footsteps. They'd come again at 1:52 a.m., longer than usual, all the way to the base of the stairs and then back. The recording had triggered at 1:51 a.m. The living room was empty, completely still. No figure, no shape, nothing moving. Just the room in gray-green night vision, slightly fish-eyed from the camera angle. I watched the whole clip twice. On my third watch, I noticed something I'd missed, the couch cushion. Over the course of about 4 minutes, it slowly, almost imperceptibly compressed, as if something of great and invisible weight was sitting down. The fabric indent deepened, held, then, gradually, released. Nothing else moved. Nothing was there. I called Callum. It went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I texted, "Call me when you can, nothing urgent." I sat on the stairs and thought about what I knew. The sounds were real. The camera confirmed timing, if not a source. The cushion had moved. There was a water glass I hadn't placed. He called back 4 hours later, cheerful, apologetic. Said he'd been at the gym. I asked him, carefully, how things had been going. He said good. Really good. I asked if he'd been by the house for any reason in the last couple of weeks. He said no. Why would he? He had his own place now. Then he said something that made the room feel smaller. He said, "Actually, is everything okay over there? I've been having these dreams about the house, really vivid ones, like I'm still there, walking around at night. You know how it is when you leave somewhere you lived for a while. Part of you doesn't really leave." I said yes. I know how it is. I didn't sleep downstairs that night, or any night after. The footsteps continued for exactly 11 more days, I counted, and then stopped as abruptly as they'd begun. The water glass disappeared. The couch returned to where it had been. I've lived alone in that house for 2 years since. I haven't watched that recording again. I've moved it to a folder I don't open, buried under other folders, on a drive I keep in the closet. I know what it shows and I know what it doesn't. And I've decided that the distance between those two things is not somewhere I want to spend any more time. But I'll tell you what I think about, sometimes, in the half-second between waking and full consciousness, when the floor below me is quiet and the house is still. Part of you doesn't really leave. And some parts, the grieving parts, the parts that walked the same path at 2 a.m. because they didn't know what else to do. Maybe they take longer than others. Maybe they have to be ready. I moved into the house in March, right after my divorce was finalized. It was a good house, better than I deserved for what I was paying, which should have been my first question. 3 bedrooms, a finished basement, a backyard with an actual fence. The previous tenant had left in a hurry, according to my property manager, Dana. She said it vaguely, the way people say things when they're hoping you won't ask a follow-up. I didn't ask. I was 34 and newly alone, and I just wanted a door I could close behind me. The smart home system was already installed when I moved in. Google Nest Hub in the kitchen, smart locks on both exterior doors, motion sensor lights in the hallway, and basement stairwell. Dana said the previous tenant had set it all up and just left it. She gave me the app login and said I could reset everything under my own account, or just leave it as is. I meant to reset it. I kept meaning to. But I was unpacking, and then I was working long hours, and then it became one of those things you just stopped thinking about. The system worked fine. Lights came on when I walked down the hall. The Nest would tell me the weather when I asked. The front door would lock automatically at 10 p.m. Normal. Useful, even. I stopped noticing it was there the way you stop noticing a refrigerator hum. The first thing I noticed was the motion log. I'd downloaded the app mostly to adjust the lock schedule and hadn't explored much past that. But one night in May, about 2 months in, I was lying in bed unable to sleep, and I opened it and started poking around. There was a full activity history. Every motion event, time-stamped. I scrolled through it idly. The hallway sensor had triggered at 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. I'd been asleep since 11. I sat up and looked at the log more carefully. It was a single event. Motion detected, light activated. Motion ceased, light off, lasting about 40 seconds. Could have been anything. A moth, the sensor misfiring. I told myself that and put my phone down. I checked the log every night after that. I want to be honest about this part because it matters to what comes later. I became methodical about it. Every morning I'd review the previous night's activity. Most nights were clean. Just the automatic lock at 10 p.m. and nothing else until I woke up. But not every night. Over the following 3 weeks, I found 6 more anomalies. Always between 1 and 3 a.m. Always the hallway sensor. Occasionally the basement stairwell sensor. Never the exterior sensors. Never the ones by the front or back door. Whatever was triggering them wasn't coming in from outside. The motion was happening inside the house in the middle of the night while I was asleep. I bought a camera, a simple one, pointed at the hallway from my bedroom doorway. I told myself this was reasonable. I told myself I'd find a raccoon had gotten in through the basement, or a draft was messing with the sensors. I set it up on a Thursday and went to sleep. Friday morning I checked the footage. The hallway sat empty and still for the entire night. No motion. No anomaly in the app log either, for the first time in weeks. Saturday night. Nothing. Sunday night. Nothing. I started to feel foolish. I left the camera up but stopped checking as obsessively. I went back to my regular life. Work, dinner, television, sleep. By the following weekend, I'd half convinced myself the whole thing had been sensor errors, and that I'd worked myself up over data that meant nothing. The second week with the camera, I almost didn't check the footage on Wednesday morning. I was running late for a call, and I nearly skipped it. Something made me open the app anyway. The hallway was empty all night. Still and gray and empty. But the timestamp in the motion log showed activation at 2:09 a.m., 43 seconds, the hallway sensor. The camera had recorded nothing. The sensor said something had been there. I stood in my kitchen in my work clothes and felt the specific cold of something I couldn't explain settling into my chest. Either the sensor was malfunctioning, possible, or something had moved through that hallway and not appeared on camera. Both explanations sat badly. I called Dana and told her the sensors might be faulty. She said she'd look into it. She did not look into it. I bought a second camera, positioned it differently, angled from the other end of the hall. 2 cameras now, overlapping coverage. Nothing should be able to move through without appearing on at least one. 3 nights of nothing. Then a Thursday at 2:31 a.m., motion log triggered, 41 seconds. I pulled up both cameras. Both recorded an empty hallway. Something that the sensors detected had crossed the hallway without appearing on 2 cameras with overlapping fields of view. And I could not explain that. And I need you to understand, I am not a superstitious person. I'm an accountant. I have spent 15 years working with data, and I know what unexplained variances look like, and I know they always have an explanation. I just hadn't found this one yet. I went through every possibility. Sensor crosstalk from a neighbor's system, electromagnetic interference from the electrical panel. I called the Nest support line, and they ran a diagnostic and told me my system was functioning normally. I asked them if ghost triggers were common. The rep paused and then said, carefully, that sometimes residual configurations from a previous account could cause anomalies if the system hadn't been fully reset. I asked him what he meant by residual configurations. He said that if the previous account holder had set up any automations or routines, schedules, triggers, response sequences, and the system hadn't been wiped, those routines could still be running in the background under the old account. I asked him if there was any way to see the previous account's activity history. He said normally no, but since the devices were registered under the original account and I had the login credentials, technically the full history was still there. He walked me through how to filter the log by account origin. I want to stop here and explain something. When Dana gave me the app login, I assumed it was a management account she'd set up for the property. I had been logging into it for 2 months. I'd been reading the motion history for 2 months. I had assumed all of it was from my time in the house. The log went back 14 months. The previous tenant had lived there for 8 months before me. That meant there were 8 months of their history in there, and 6 months of mine. And I had been reading both together without knowing, and I had not once filtered by date carefully enough to notice the earliest entries were from before I moved in. I started at the beginning of their tenancy and scrolled forward. Normal patterns, motion during the day, quiet nights, the smart lock engaging at bedtime. Then, around month 5 of their time there, the nighttime anomalies started. Same profile as mine. Hallway sensor, 1 to 3 a.m., no exterior triggers. They ran for 6 weeks. Then the previous tenant's activity stopped entirely. Not tapered off. Stopped. 1 day there and then nothing. That was the day they moved out in a hurry. I scrolled forward into my tenancy and found the 6-week gap, my first 2 months in the house, when I hadn't been checking the log. Clean. Nothing anomalous. The anomalies started again in May, the week I downloaded the app and started paying attention. I put my phone face down on the counter and stood very still in my kitchen and thought about the shape of what I was looking at. The anomalies had happened to the previous tenant. Then they'd left. Then they'd started again, for me, exactly when I started watching for them. I called the Nest rep back. I asked him if the previous account had set up an automation, a routine that triggered sensor pings on a schedule, say, something that would make the log show motion events that weren't real motion. Would that routine still be running? He said yes. If the account hadn't been wiped, any scheduled automation would still execute. I asked if there was a way to check what automations were set. He walked me through the menu. There was one active routine I hadn't created, set up 14 months ago under the original account. It was a simple trigger sequence. Activate hallway motion sensor log entry, randomized interval, between 1 and 3 a.m., 4 to 7 times per month. No light activation, no camera trigger, just the log entry. Someone had programmed the house to appear haunted, not for themselves. The routine was still running because they'd left it running. They'd built it and then left it inside the walls of a house they knew someone else would move into. Someone who would download the app. Someone who would lie awake and check the log. Someone who would buy cameras and find nothing on them and feel the cold, specific terror of something in the house that couldn't be seen. I reset the entire system that night, wiped every account, every automation, every history. I started from zero. The anomalies stopped. Of course they stopped. But here is what I still think about 2 years later, when I'm falling asleep in that house with the hallway dark and the sensors quiet. The previous tenant had those same 6 weeks of anomalies before they left. The same pattern, the same profile. They moved out in a hurry. They didn't build that routine. It was already there when they arrived, which means someone built it before them, in an account I couldn't access, layered underneath everything, running quietly. And when that tenant left, they were so frightened that they forgot, or didn't bother, to shut it down. They just ran, the same way I almost did. I've never found the original account. Nest support says there's no record of a prior registration on these devices. Dana says she doesn't know the full history of the property, before her management company took it over. The routine was there when I moved in. 14 months of log entries before I arrived, all of them showing the same pattern, going back further than any tenant I can trace. Someone built a haunting into this house and walked away, and somewhere out there, they know exactly which house it is.